Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show, Science Dispatch Podcast. My name is Cameron English, your host as always. Joined again by Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. Chuck, it's been a minute. How are you?
It's been fine since I last spoke to you. The sun has come out momentarily, but it is going back in. And that's the report from the East Coast.
There you go. There you go. The sun exists on the East Coast of the United States, if you're curious.
Despite the problems with the eclipse, which, by the way, was not due to global warming.
Oh, politicians. God bless them. My goodness. Okay. All right. Well, there's your first lesson. Eclipses occur whether or not the planet is warming due to greenhouse gas emissions. But our topic for today is, I dare say, a potentially more pressing one, Chuck, given the ubiquity of plastic. So this article of yours is called "Plastic Plague: Unwelcome Guests in Your Arteries?" ? And this is your write-up of a recent study that was in the New England Journal of Medicine. So here's the summary at the top, and then you can dive in and explain what's going on here. So you write, micro and nanoplastics found in the plaque within our arteries are born from the ubiquitous presence of plastics in our environment. They are raising eyebrows and heart rates among scientists and physicians, courtesy of a groundbreaking study in the New England Journal of Medicine. Okay, tell us about this groundbreaking paper, Dr. Dinnerstein.
Well, yeah, I don't kind of ground it was breaking, but it did break some. So they were very interested in looking at micro and nanoplastics. And these are elements of plastic that are shed from all the plastic products that we use, from those single-use disposable bags that are banned everywhere, to microbeads in cosmetics, as well as in the fibers from the synthetic materials in our clothing. So you can see right away that it's going to be tough if it's in cosmetics and it's in our clothing, that it's going to be tough to not have these particular small-sized plastics floating around. And they are, in fact, very small. It's very difficult when you hear the term microplastics and nanoplastics to get a sense of what we're really talking about. But nanoplastics, and these are the plastics that they found in people's arteries, we'll get to in a second, 400,000 of them would fit in a drop of water. They're about 5 times the size of a red blood cell. You ain't going to see them. They're there. And they're floating around, and as a result, we inhale them into our respiratory tree, some of which are then absorbed, and we digest them. We eat them all the time. And they're on the food. There's just nothing that we're going to do short of getting rid of all the plastics in the universe that's going to change the fact that they exist. The reason that they've come to our attention is because our ability to see them has gotten far better over the last 10 or 12 years, so once you can measure it, then we can discuss it. Before then, they weren't there. In any case, the researchers were interested in whether any of these nanoplastics had gotten into our circulation and whether they cause bad things. So the first piece of news is, yes, the nanoplastics get into our circulation. How they get in there remains a little bit unclear. How they get from our lungs into our bloodstream remains a little bit of a mystery. Same thing for how they get from our gut into our bloodstream. But certainly there are cells that would engulf these little pieces of plastic, and those cells themselves could be transferred from one place to another. So there's ways that it can happen, and certainly that they were there. They looked at individuals undergoing a procedure called a carotid endarterectomy, which when I was a vascular surgeon was really my favorite operation. And it's an operation designed to prevent strokes. The carotid bifurcation, the carotid artery supplies most of the blood to the brain. It's in the front of the neck, and it separates into two. The external artery goes to your face, the internal carotid goes up into your brain, and where they separate at the bifurcation, for a bunch of interesting physical reasons, plaque forms there. And so the surgeons will go in and we remove that. We just physically remove the plaque and close things up, and that cuts down on the incidence of subsequent stroke. They looked at a group of people that were undergoing this procedure that had not had strokes previously, but it had very high-grade lesions that surgeons felt could increase their risk of having a stroke. Now, this is a very select group of patients with cardiovascular disease. As I wrote in the article, approximately 900,000 coronary artery stent procedures are performed every year in the United States. Half that many, 400,000 coronary artery bypass operations are performed. 45,000 carotid endarterectomies are performed. And what that says is that this group of patients that they looked at have a form of cardiovascular disease that is much more chronic, much more indolent, and can be associated with more problems. So the reason they didn't look at people, say, with coronary artery disease is they couldn't get those specimens. The carotid artery specimens are freely available and large enough to look at. So that's part and parcel of what they did. In any case, when they looked at a group of patients, they found that, lo and behold, about 70% of them had some detectable levels of microplastics, those 400,000 per drop of water particles in their plaque. And that of those people that had plaque, 20% of them had evidence of a non-fatal heart attack, a stroke, or death subsequent to the surgery versus 7% of the patients that didn't have it. So they said the microplastics were responsible in essence for a fourfold increase in the risk of some kind of untoward event. And that was their basic finding. They were fair on two other points. One point they made was that their results did not prove causality. They said it just straight out. So it's more of an interesting finding than anything else. And the other point that they made is that many of the models that have looked at the presence of microplastics have looked at levels of microplastics in the environment that are orders of magnitude above anything that have been seen in the study. So the bottom line of the story, from my point of view, is it's an interesting finding. I don't understand how the particles got there to begin with, but as to whether they are responsible in some way for more detrimental effects in the long term, we're a long way from associating that, let alone proving it.
Yeah, I want to ask you about confounding, because I think that's a huge issue. And they seem to basically say that's quite likely. But one of the things that comes to mind to me is that if you're looking at a population who's at higher risk for cardiovascular disease or, some sort of, heart health related issue, they're going to be spending more time in healthcare settings and hospitals, which means they're going to be hooked up to IV tubes and oxygen tubes and blood bags and so forth much more frequently, which of course in most places in the developed world are made of some sort of plastic. So in other words, I guess what I'm getting at here is not only are they exposed to plastic, but they might be exposed to it in a way that's actually improving their health or protecting their health. And so what might show up here is you're exposed to plastic, but maybe it actually helped you, avoid a stroke or something to that effect. So what do you think that possibility, but just confounding more generally here?
Well, I think that the confounding really lies with the fact of the patient population that they selected. And you're right. These are people that are going to be spending more time in healthcare settings and are actually going to be exposed to more plastics than the average person walking down the street. The same thing with having chosen the carotid patients to work with. These people presenting with carotid artery disease is usually the last in a series of ways that these individuals would present. Frequently, and the numbers when they looked at the groupings reflected that these are people that have pre-existing symptomatic coronary artery disease. So they have a different kind of disease, say, than some other people. And again, I'm really at a loss to understand how these microplastics wound up adhering to the arterial wall. Their flow of blood past these arteries keep things moving along. The bifurcation is kind of an interesting physical structure because flow slows quite dramatically at the flow divider, just from the physics of turbulence and things that are way past my pay grade to understand or explain. And so it's certainly possible that the microplastics are dwelling in that area longer. And remember when we talk about atherosclerotic lesion that this is an inflammatory lesion. So there's macrophages and other cells present that are certainly capable of engulfing these microplastics. So it very well may be that the microplastic was in the wrong place at the wrong time and got eaten by the plaque, and it's just, not necessarily an innocent bystander, but just is caught up in the process, and that's what they're seeing. We don't know.
Now, I'm sure little shocks you these days. I mean, you've seen a lot over your career, and then you've been writing now for, over a decade, doing this science education outreach, whatever you want to call it, whatever ACSH does. You've been doing it a long time. And I'm looking at the headlines for coverage of this study, and they were just beyond the pale. I mean, even for the stuff we normally cover. So, Forbes said, microplastics in arteries heighten heart attack and stroke risk. Study finds, study warns. Study links microplastics in arteries to huge increase in heart disease and death. And I mean, in my newsfeed here, your story is the only one that shows up with a reasonable headline, which is a question, right? Are these really unwelcome guests? Everything else I read, from everything else, even from a website like The Conversation, which is supposed to be the science-based, middle-of-the-road kind of balls and strikes website, even they exaggerated it. So what do you make of the news coverage here? Is it just the typical if it bleeds, it leads phenomenon?
Well, it doesn't even bleed. So, but it has to do with plastic. And we all know that plastic has to come out of the environment. So this is just another one of the ways that I'm going to use the word simple-minded, but that may be unfair. That is unfair. Choose to pose some of the information that they find. There's very few people that wrote specifically about the group of patients they selected, because the people that wrote the article are not vascular surgeons, and the people writing the articles for the media certainly are not. So they're just not aware of some of the nuances of the groups that they selected. And so in the sense you're right, if it bleeds, it leads. In this case, it's another reason why we shouldn't have single-use plastic bags, which was, by the way, one of the recommendations made by the authors. You can protect yourself by not, using single-use bags. But I noticed they didn't mention you should stop using cosmetics, because that probably is not going to go over as well as the argument for bags.
Right. Well, as a recovering journalist, I'll be a little more blunt and say that the people that wrote these stories are ridiculous. There's just no excuse for this. All you got to do is read the paper. You don't even have to read the whole thing, Just read the methods, read the It's not that hard is what I'm saying. I just don't buy into the, we got to get readers and we're on deadlines. Everyone's on a deadline, What?
All you had to read was the part where it says it's important to note that our results do not prove causality.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of the stories, to their credit, did at least mention that, but the headline is exaggerated, the lead of the story is exaggerated, and then if you get to the 8th or 9th paragraph of the article, oh, by the way, there's absolutely no evidence of harm from this study.
In today's media environment, if you get to the 8th or 9th paragraph, you are a very persistent reader.
Dark times we live in, because that is indeed a fact.
So hopefully they've made it through 10 or 12 minutes of this. That's why I mentioned it earlier on.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I appreciate that. Well, we'll leave it there. We don't want to steal too much of your attention. You have TikTok videos to watch, I'm sure. Probably not this audience. I doubt that, in fact. But in any case, don't lose any sleep over microplastics. Use fewer plastic bags if you want, but whatever. There we go. Just pump the brakes, as always, seems to be the take-home message. But as always, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week. Until then, we're on social media. It's at ACSH.org. I'm at CamJEnglish. Chuck's the smart one. He's not on any of those websites. So email the organization if you have a question. He will get back to you. And with that, we will see you next time.